I'm Richard Thompson, 62 years old, and I never imagined that on the day I was born into this world, the person I cherished most would look at me and call me a burden. It was my birthday, and I had spent the afternoon preparing something simple, a quiet dinner, just the two of us. I cooked her favorite dish, set the table carefully, even lit a small candle on the cake I had picked up earlier. Nothing extravagant. Just a father hoping his daughter might sit across from him, share a meal, maybe laugh about old times. I remember the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence as I adjusted the plates, the soft glow of the candle flickering in the dim light. I thought of the years when she was small, when birthdays were full of balloons and laughter, when she would climb onto my lap, her little hands tugging at my shirt, eager to help me blow out the candles. Back then, she used to call me her hero. Those memories kept me smiling as I waited. She walked into the room a little late, phone in her hand, her expression distant. I greeted her with a smile and said softly, "Sit with me, it's my birthday." I thought those words might be enough to remind her, to spark even a flicker of warmth. Instead, she glanced at the table, then at me. Her lips curled, not in a smile, but in something sharper. She sighed, crossed her arms, and with a tone so cold it sliced right through me, she said, "You're a burden." For a moment, the world stopped. My hands froze on the edge of the table. The room seemed smaller, tighter, as though the air had been pulled out of it. My own daughter, the little girl whose scraped knees I once bandaged, whose tears I wiped when life was unkind, now looked at me like I was nothing but dead weight. And she chose to say it on my birthday. I didn't argue. I didn't let her see me break. Instead, I leaned forward, blew out the candle, and let the tiny flame die. Just like that, the warmth I thought still connected us vanished in the smoke. Nobody called. No friends came by. No neighbors knocked to wish me well. I sat alone at that table, staring at the extinguished candle, wondering how the child I gave everything for had grown to see me as nothing at all. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see that night, was that I was caring far more for her than she ever imagined, and when I stopped, her whole world would change. Have you ever been called a burden by someone you loved? Did it make you question every sacrifice you made? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I know I'm not the only father who has felt this kind of pain. That night, after she left the table, I sat in the quiet for a long time. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the untouched plate I had prepared, the little cake with its smoke still hanging in the air. 62 years of living, decades of sacrifice, and in one sentence, my daughter made me feel smaller than I had ever felt in my life. But as the silence grew heavier, my mind drifted back to another time. I remembered holding her for the first time in the hospital, how tiny she was in my arms, how I whispered promises into her ear she couldn't yet understand, promises that I would protect her, provide for her, give her the kind of life I never had. And for years, that's exactly what I did. I worked long shifts at the factory, picked up side jobs, fixing neighbors' roofs, and even sold my old pickup once when money was tight, all so she could go on her school trips, have the shoes she wanted, and never feel less than the other kids around her. There were nights when I came home so exhausted I could barely stand, but when she tugged at my hand and said, "One more story before bed, Dad," I never said no. I used to tell her the same story about a brave little bird learning to fly, and she'd drift off to sleep with a smile. Back then, I believed all the sacrifice was worth it, that someday she would look back and know how deeply she was loved. But on my birthday, she didn't see a father who had given everything. She saw only a man taking up space, a burden. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake thinking about all the times I had quietly stepped in to keep her life running. The unpaid bills I covered, the emergencies I handled before she even knew they existed. She thought her independence was her own doing, but the truth was, I was the safety net she never noticed beneath her feet. And that's when something inside me shifted. If my daughter truly believed I was a burden, then maybe it was time she saw what life looked like without me carrying her weight. The thought made my chest tighten, but my mind was clear. I knew what I had to do. Because sometimes, the best way to teach someone the value of what you give is to take it away. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring out the window as the sun crawled over the horizon. The bitterness on my tongue matched the ache in my chest. My daughter's words still echoed in my head, louder than the sound of the birds outside or the hum of the fridge. "You're a burden." I thought about the bills spread out in the drawer of my desk. Over the years, I had quietly taken care of so much for her. Her rent when she couldn't make ends meet. The car payment, so she wouldn't lose the vehicle that got her to work. The credit card bills, always piling up, always just a little more than she could handle. She never asked me outright, but she never refused the help either. I wired the money quietly, always telling myself it was temporary, always thinking that someday she'd find her footing. But she never did, and maybe that was my fault. Maybe I made it too easy for her to lean on me without even realizing it. I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was giving her the chance to breathe, to live her life without the constant fear of falling behind. But in doing that, maybe I had taken away the very thing that teaches us all how to stand: responsibility. I remembered the day I sold my watch, the only piece of jewelry her late mother ever gave me. It was gold, simple, with an engraving on the back that read, "For Richard, who always keeps us on time." I pawned it to cover her tuition payment one semester when she was in college. She never knew. She just thought the school finally gave her a break. I told myself it was worth it. Watching her walk across that graduation stage, I thought I'd done the right thing. But now, looking back, I wondered if she ever really understood what it took to get her there. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. She had no idea how much I cared for her, how many times I had chosen her comfort over my own needs. And that was the moment I knew if she couldn't see it on her own, I'd have to let her feel it. So I made up my mind, quietly, calmly. I was going to stop, and when I did, she would finally know the truth. The decision settled into me like a stone in water, sinking deeper with every passing hour. That evening, I walked into my small study, pulled out the drawer where I kept all the bills and statements, and laid them out on the desk. The neat stacks of paper looked harmless enough, but I knew what they represented: years of me carrying her life on my back while she believed she was walking on her own. The rent payments I had been quietly wiring every month, the auto draft for her car loan, the credit card debt that ballooned faster than she could keep track of, but which I always trimmed down before it got out of control. Even her phone bill was tied to my account. She never noticed, because she never had to. I sat there for a long moment, my fingers resting on the edges of the papers. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then, slowly, I began. The first call was to the bank, canceling the automatic transfers for her rent. My voice was steady, though my chest felt tight. The woman on the other end confirmed the changes politely, not knowing she had just shifted the ground beneath my daughter's feet. Next, I called the car company. I had been covering the balance for over a year, telling myself it was just until she caught up, but she never did. I ended that arrangement too, my voice calm, each word deliberate. One by one, I cut the threads that tied me to her financial safety net. Each cancellation felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders, but at the same time, it left a hollow ache in my chest. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I wasn't doing it to punish her. I was doing it because she needed to understand the truth, that the father she called a burden was the very one keeping her world from falling apart. When I finished, I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath. For the first time in years, the responsibility wasn't mine anymore. I looked at the quiet room around me, at the clock still ticking steadily on the wall. She had no idea what was coming, but soon enough, she would. And when she did, she'd finally see who had been carrying her all along. For the next few days, I watched her move about her life, as if nothing had changed. She still came and went at odd hours, laughing into her phone, arms full of shopping bags, ordering food instead of cooking. Her confidence was steady, her smile intact. She had no idea that the invisible net beneath her had been cut away. I said nothing. I didn't warn her. I didn't hint. I simply watched. There was a strange calm in knowing that the wheels had already been set in motion, that each carefree step she took was bringing her closer to a truth she had long ignored. One evening she breezed past me in the hallway, perfume trailing in the air, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Going out with friends," she tossed over her shoulder, barely glancing at me. I nodded, though inside I felt something heavier. I had seen the bills. I knew the dates. The rent would be due in just 3 days. The car payment in 5. The credit card balance was already past due. Still, she laughed as though the world owed her its brightness. She scrolled on her phone, posted pictures with captions about how independent she was, how strong she felt. I read the words from the quiet of my chair, a small, sad smile touching my lips. She believed it, but only because I had always kept the storm from reaching her. That storm was on its way now. The first sign came with a knock at the door. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard it. She answered, and I heard the muffled voice of the landlord. His tone was sharp, his words clipped. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard enough. Late payment. Notice. Last warning. Last warning. Her voice rose in protest, quick and defensive, but thin. After a moment, the door shut hard. She stormed past me, her face flushed with anger, muttering under her breath. When our eyes met, she didn't speak. She just disappeared into her room, slamming the door behind her. I sipped my tea in silence. The cracks were beginning to show. She thought it was just a misunderstanding, a mistake easily fixed. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The rest was coming, piece by piece, until the weight she thought was hers alone would finally crush her. The rent notice had rattled her, but she brushed it off the way she brushed off most things. For a day or two, she carried herself with the same arrogance, walking through the house with her head held high, posting selfies as if the world still believed her story. But I could see it in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. The worry had begun to creep in. It didn't take long for the next crack to appear. One evening, she flicked on the light switch in her room, and nothing happened. I heard her mutter under her breath, flipping the switch again and again, as if it might suddenly obey her. She stormed into the hallway, phone already in her hand, and shouted something about calling the electric company. I sat quietly in my chair, pretending to be lost in the evening news. She didn't know that the account she was about to call on was tied to me, that the service she thought was hers had been carried on my shoulders all along. A few minutes later, I heard her voice rise, sharp and panicked. She came out of her room, pacing the living room with her phone pressed against her ear. Words like shut-off notice and balance due floated through the air. She argued, demanded, pleaded, but when she hung up, her face was pale, her jaw tight. The silence that followed was louder than her shouting. I thought back to the nights I had sat at this very table, writing checks I could barely afford, just to make sure the lights in her world never went dark. I had done it quietly, never mentioning it, never asking for thanks. And now, standing in the dim living room, she finally felt what I had been shielding her from. A few days later, her car sat motionless in the driveway. I knew why. The payment had been missed, and the company didn't waste time sending their warnings. She tried to ignore it, tried to pretend nothing was wrong, but every time she passed that car, I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. Still, she said nothing to me. Pride kept her lips sealed, but I knew it was only a matter of time before that pride cracked too. Because little by little the world I had built for her was falling apart, and she was finally standing in the rubble. By the end of the week, the house was filled with tension. The rent was overdue, the lights flickered on and off, and the car in the driveway had become a silent reminder of everything slipping out of her control. I could see her pacing at night, the glow of her phone lighting up her worried face as she scrolled through messages and bank statements. She thought I couldn't hear, but the walls carried her muffled curses, the sound of a young woman realizing for the first time what it meant to stand without a net beneath her. Then came the letter. I saw it slip through the mail slot one morning while I was pouring my coffee. The bold red letters on the envelope were impossible to miss. She snatched it up quickly, her hands shaking as she tore it open. Her eyes darted across the page, her lips moving silently as she read. Then she crumpled the paper in her fist and slammed it onto the counter. That was the car company's final notice. For hours, she stomped around the house, calling friends, leaving messages, even trying to arrange something with the landlord over the phone, but each call ended the same with disappointment. One by one, the people she thought she could lean on disappeared, their voices full of excuses, their promises empty. Independence feels powerful when the world is easy. But when the bills come due and the friends are gone, reality feels a lot heavier. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, she finally turned her anger toward me. She stormed into the living room, her phone clutched in her hand, her voice sharp and brittle. "Dad," she snapped, "what's going on? Why are the lights getting shut off? Why am I getting eviction notices? What happened to the car payment?" I looked up from my chair, calm as ever, the newspaper resting in my lap. For years I had waited for this moment for her to finally ask, finally notice. "You tell me," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed, confusion flashing across her face. What's that supposed to mean? You're supposed to help me. You always have. Why are you letting everything fall apart? I didn't answer right away. I just met her gaze and let the silence stretch between us, heavy and unspoken. Because this was only the beginning. Her voice cracked as she stood there, demanding explanations like a queen whose throne was suddenly crumbling beneath her. You're supposed to be my father, she shouted, pacing the room. You've always taken care of things. Why now? Why are you suddenly just sitting there watching everything fall apart? I set the newspaper down gently, folding it with care before placing it on the table beside me. I looked at her, really looked at her. The anger in her eyes wasn't strength, it was fear dressed up in rage. For years, I said quietly, I've been taking care of things you never even knew about. Rent, bills, that car you love so much. Every time you thought you made it through on your own, it was me standing behind you, holding the weight so you wouldn't feel it. She blinked, taken aback, but only for a moment. Then her anger flared hotter. So, what? You're my dad. That's what you're supposed to do. You don't just stop because you feel like it. You don't just abandon me. Her words hit hard, sharper than I expected. Abandon her? The very girl who had called me a burden on my birthday now stood in front of me, accusing me of abandonment. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I didn't stop because I felt like it, I told her. I stopped because you looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing but a weight on your shoulders. You wanted to see what life was without me? Well, now you're seeing it. For a moment, she was silent. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but nothing came out. Her pride wouldn't let her admit she understood, and her fear wouldn't let her walk away. Instead, she laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. You're pathetic, she spat. This is just your way of getting back at me, isn't it? You want to watch me suffer so you can feel powerful again. That's sick, Dad. I didn't flinch. I didn't rise to meet her anger. I just sat there in the fading light of the living room, letting her words echo in the silence. She didn't realize yet that this wasn't about power. It was about truth. Finally, she turned, storming off to her room, the slam of the door rattling the walls. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. After she slammed the door, the house fell into silence again. I sat there in the dim light, staring at the closed hallway, thinking about the weight of her words. You're pathetic. It echoed in my chest, sharper even than when she called me a burden. Strange how the child you once cradled in your arms could grow into someone who spoke to you like a stranger. But my mind drifted back, as it often did, to when she was small. I remembered the way she would run into the living room after school, waving her drawings in the air, shouting, "Look, Dad, look what I made!" I'd pin them on the fridge, each one a masterpiece to me, even when they were just crooked stick figures and wobbly rainbows. At night she'd climb into my lap, pressing her head against my chest, asking me to tell her stories until she drifted off to sleep. Back then, she called me her hero. Back then, she believed I could fix anything. It was strange, sitting there now, realizing how far we had drifted. Somewhere along the way, her gratitude had turned to expectation, and expectation had turned to entitlement. She no longer saw me as her hero. She saw me as her safety net, a net she didn't even respect. The next morning, I heard her moving around early. She left in a rush, slamming the door behind her. Hours passed before she returned, her expression tight, her movements sharper than usual. She avoided my eyes, heading straight to her room. Later, I overheard her on the phone, her voice low but urgent. She was asking a friend for money. I could hear the pleading in her tone, the pauses that meant she wasn't getting the answer she wanted. By the third call, her voice cracked. "Just a little. Please, I'll pay you back next week." Silence followed, then a soft, angry curse. I leaned against the wall, listening, my heart heavy. It hurt to hear her struggle, but at the same time, it was the lesson she needed. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her words from my birthday echoed louder than ever. "You're a burden." No, she had it backwards. I was the reason she had stood so tall for so long. She just couldn't see it, not yet. And I knew soon she would. Because life had a way of forcing truth onto those who refused to see it. The following days grew heavier, the air in the house thick with tension. I noticed she stopped going out as often. The laughter on her phone calls faded, replaced by shorter conversations, then silence. Her friends, the ones who cheered her on when times were easy, were disappearing one by one. I'd hear her leave voicemails that went unanswered, see the frustration on her face when no one called back. Independence was fun to brag about online, but when the lights went out and the bills piled up, independence wasn't such a shiny badge anymore. One evening, I heard her crying in her room. Not the angry, bitter sounds from before, but soft, muffled sobs that carried through the walls. I sat in my chair, staring at the flicker of the television, my chest heavy. A part of me wanted to knock on her door, to comfort her the way I used to when she was little. But another part of me knew this was necessary. She had to feel it. She had to know what it meant to live without the man she dismissed as a burden. It wasn't long before she emerged, her eyes red, her shoulders slumped. She stood in the doorway of the living room, clutching her phone, like it might still save her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I need help." I turned the volume down on the television and looked at her. There was no anger in her tone now, no bitter edge, just fear. "What kind of help?" I asked calmly. She swallowed hard. "The landlord's threatening to evict me. My car's about to be repossessed. My friends, they won't pick up anymore. I don't know what to do." Her eyes searched mine, desperate, pleading. For the first time in years, she looked less like a grown woman, and more like the little girl who used to run to me after scraping her knee. But I stayed quiet, letting the silence sit between us. She shifted uncomfortably, her voice breaking. "Please, Dad, I can't do this alone." I let out a slow breath, my gaze steady. She didn't realize that's exactly what I wanted her to understand, that without me, she was alone. I didn't give her an answer. Not yet. Instead, I turned off the television, stood up, and walked past her toward my room. Because this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of her learning. It didn't take long for the world outside our walls to notice what was happening. A few mornings later, I sat by the window with my coffee when a tow truck rumbled slowly up the street. Its flashing lights reflected against the houses as it stopped in front of our driveway. My daughter came rushing out barefoot, her hair tangled, shouting at the man stepping out of the cab. "This is a mistake," she cried, her voice sharp and frantic. "You can't take my car." The man barely looked at her. He unfolded the paperwork calmly, explaining that the payments were months behind and there was nothing he could do. She begged, she pleaded, her voice cracking as the neighbors peeked out through their curtains, whispering behind their hands. But in the end, the chain clanked, the engine roared, and the car that had once been her pride was hauled away in plain sight. I watched quietly from the window. My heart ached, but I didn't move. She had told me I was a burden. Now, for the first time, she was carrying the weight I had shielded her from all these years. Later that day, I overheard the neighbors outside, their voices low but unmistakable. "Did you see her car? Repossessed," one murmured. Another sighed. "Such a shame. She always acted like she had it all together." Gossip spreads fast in a neighborhood. By evening, I knew half the block had heard, and so did she. She slammed her bedroom door and refused to come out for hours, embarrassed not just by her troubles, but by the fact that everyone knew. The electricity followed soon after. One night, the lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving the house cloaked in darkness. I lit a candle at the kitchen table, watching her stumble through the rooms, cursing under her breath. She dialed numbers frantically, but each call ended in silence or rejection. Her friends had drifted away, unwilling to shoulder her burdens when they realized she couldn't even shoulder her own. I sat in the glow of the candle, steady and calm. She thought I was cruel, but I wasn't. I was giving her the lesson she had denied herself for too long. The man she dismissed was the very man who kept her world from crumbling. And now that world was collapsing, piece by painful piece. The night the lights went out, she locked herself in her room. I could hear her pacing, hear the muffled sound of her phone calls as she tried one number after another. By midnight, the house was silent, except for the faint sound of her sobs through the wall. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering her words on my birthday. "You're a burden." Now she finally knew what a life without me looked like. The next morning, I found my phone buzzing with a missed call. When I checked the voicemail, her voice came through, shaky and broken. "Dad, I don't know what to do. The landlord says if I don't pay by tomorrow, I'm out. The power's gone, the car's gone, and I don't have anyone else to call. Please, please, I'm sorry. Just help me. I need you." I sat at the kitchen table, listening to that message over and over. Each time, her voice cracked in the same place, each word weighed down with desperation. For a moment, I felt my resolve weaken. She was my daughter, my little girl. Every instinct in me wanted to run to her, to fix it all like I always had. But then I remembered that night again, her face cold, her arms crossed, the words that cut me deeper than any wound. "You're a burden." She had to feel the truth now. She had to live with it until she understood. So, I didn't call back. I didn't text. I set the phone down, turned it face down on the table, and let the silence stretch on. That evening, she came into the living room, her eyes red and swollen, her lips pressed tight, as if the words she wanted to say wouldn't come. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, retreating to her room without a sound. The house felt heavier than ever, but I held my ground. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. For the first time in years. Because sometimes silence is louder than any words. Sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of what they had is to let them lose it completely. And though it tore at me inside, I knew the silence was working. 3 days passed after that voicemail, and the silence between us grew heavier with every hour. She hardly left her room, except to shuffle to the kitchen, her shoulders slumped, her steps slow. The girl who once strutted with pride now moved like a shadow. I stayed quiet, watching, waiting. Then, one evening, I heard a soft knock at my bedroom door. Not the angry pounding I'd grown used to, not the impatient thud of someone demanding answers. This was different, hesitant, fragile. "Dad," she whispered, her voice small. "Can I talk to you?" I opened the door to find her standing there, arms wrapped around herself, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her makeup was smudged, her hair unkempt. Gone was the polished young woman who bragged about her independence. In her place stood someone who looked lost, broken, and painfully young again. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said on your birthday. I was angry. I was stupid. I need you, Dad. I can't do this alone." For a moment, I just looked at her. My heart ached to see her like that. The same little girl who once clung to my leg when she was scared. Part of me wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her it was all right, that I would fix everything like I always had. But another part of me, the wiser part, knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the moment she needed to understand that my silence wasn't cruelty, but a mirror showing her the truth. I stepped aside and let her into the room. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap, her body trembling as if the weight of the past week had finally crushed her spirit. I sat across from her, steady and calm, my hands folded, the silence stretched, thick and unrelenting. She shifted, her voice breaking again. "Dad, please say something." I drew in a slow breath, my eyes fixed on hers. "You called me a burden," I said quietly. "But the truth is, without me, you couldn't even stand." Her face crumpled. Tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks, her sobs breaking the heavy quiet between us. And in that moment, I knew the time had come to finally tell her everything. Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't move at first. I let her sit in the weight of her own words, the echo of that night still ringing between us. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean it, Dad. I swear I didn't. I was just angry. I wasn't thinking." I leaned forward, my voice steady but heavy. "Do you think words don't matter? Do you think they just vanish after you say them? You looked me in the eye on the day I was born into this world and told me I was a burden. That wasn't anger speaking. That was pride. That was disrespect. And I couldn't let it go." She lowered her head, shame flooding her face. "For years," I continued, "I carried you, quietly, without complaint. I paid your rent when you couldn't. I covered your car payments, your credit card bills, even your phone. Every time you thought you were independent, that you were making it on your own, it was me standing behind you, holding everything up." Her breath hitched, her shoulders shaking harder with each word I spoke. "I sold things that mattered to me just to keep your world from falling apart. Did you know that?" I asked, my voice tightening. "Your mother gave me a watch before she passed, a gold watch with an engraving on the back. I pawned it to cover your tuition one semester. You walked across that stage with a smile, thinking you earned it all yourself. But it was me, always me, behind the curtain making sure you never felt the struggle." She pressed her hands to her face, muffling a sob. "And what did I get in return? I asked softly. On my birthday, I sat at a table with a cake I bought myself, waiting for my daughter to share a meal. And all I got were words that cut deeper than any knife. You're a burden. That's how you saw me after everything. Her hands dropped, her eyes swollen and wet as they met mine. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't see it. That's the problem, I said, my tone sharper now. You never saw it. You lived in the comfort I gave you, blind to what it cost me. And when I finally stopped, your whole world collapsed. That's not coincidence. That's truth. She broke then, burying her face in her hands as the room filled with her cries. And I sat there, steady, knowing she was finally beginning to understand. As she sat there crying, her shoulders shaking with every breath, my eyes drifted to the old photograph on the nightstand. Her mother's smile stared back at me from behind the glass, frozen in time. I reached for it without thinking, my fingers brushing against the frame. Do you know what your mother would say if she were here right now? I asked quietly. My daughter lifted her tear-streaked face, her lips trembling, but she didn't answer. She would be heartbroken, I continued. Not because of the bills, not because of the car or the lights or the rent, but because the daughter we raised together, the little girl we poured our lives into, grew up to look at her own father and see nothing but a burden. Her sobs quieted, replaced by a heavy silence. Your mother believed in you, I said, my voice softening. She believed you'd grow to be kind, grateful, strong. She believed that if I worked myself to the bone to provide, you'd see it, and you'd carry that strength forward. But somewhere along the way, something changed. You stopped seeing me as the man who gave everything for you, and started seeing me as someone holding you back. I turned the photo in my hands, the weight of memory pressing into my chest. When she was sick, I promised her one thing, that I would never let you go without. That I would sacrifice whatever I had to so you'd be safe. And I kept that promise. I kept it for years. Even when it cost me everything I loved, everything I owned, I thought I was doing right by you. But maybe I was only shielding you too much. Her eyes flickered to the photo in my hand, her lip quivering. I miss her, she whispered. I do too, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. Every day, and I know she's looking down right now, watching us. And I can only pray that she understands why I had to do this, why I had to let you fall, so you could finally see the truth. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out, her hand trembling as if she wanted to take the photo from me, to hold on to some piece of her mother in this moment of pain. But I held it close, letting the silence settle again, the weight of her mother's absence reminding us both of everything we had already lost. In the days that followed our conversation, the weight of her struggles spread beyond the walls of our home. The neighborhood had begun to notice. You could feel it in the way people lingered outside a little longer, their eyes flicking toward our house as though they were watching a storm unfold from a distance. I overheard them once, two neighbors talking by the sidewalk, voices lowered but not low enough. She lost her car, one said, shaking his head. Saw the tow truck myself. The other sighed. And I heard the power's been cut off too. Must be tough times in there. Word travels fast, faster than anyone wants it to. By the end of the week, I knew half the street had heard about her troubles. And so did she. Every time she stepped outside, she walked faster, her head down, her shoulders hunched. Gone was the proud young woman who strutted with her chin high, who lived for the eyes of others. Now, she hurried past their gazes, her confidence crumbling under the weight of whispers. At night, I would hear her pacing again. The phone calls grew fewer, shorter, more desperate. Friends who once filled her evenings with laughter now offered only silence. She sat at the kitchen table one night with her head in her hands, the glow of her phone screen lighting her face as tears slid silently down her cheeks. I watched from the doorway, unseen, my chest heavy. Part of me wanted to step in, to ease the humiliation, to shield her like I always had. But another part reminded me. This was the point. She had to face the consequences of the life she built on comfort I had quietly provided. Without those comforts, she was being forced to see reality for the first time. The breaking down wasn't just in the unpaid bills or the repossessed car. It was in the way she looked at herself, the way she realized the image she had worked so hard to project was slipping away. Her pride was cracking, and pride, once it shatters, cuts deeper than any unpaid notice ever could. I knew then that the lesson was working. Slowly, painfully, She was beginning to see me not as a burden, but as the foundation she had taken for granted. And the hardest part of it all? Knowing she still hadn't reached the bottom yet. It was late one evening when she finally came to me again. The house was quiet, the only sound the steady tick of the clock on the wall. She stepped into the living room slowly, almost timidly, her hands twisting together as though she was still holding back words she didn't know how to say. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I set down my book and nodded. She sat across from me, her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pressed in, thick and unrelenting, until finally she lifted her head. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Everything's falling apart. I can't pay the rent. I can't fix the bills. Everyone I thought I could rely on is gone. And the worst part is, I know it's because of me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with something I hadn't heard from her in years. Accountability. For the first time, she wasn't blaming me, wasn't lashing out in anger. She was admitting her own part in it. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "You've been given a choice," I told her. "You can keep living the way you have, angry, blind, blaming everyone else. Or you can take responsibility, stand on your own 2 feet, and learn what it truly means to live. I can't make that choice for you. It's yours alone." Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "I want to change, Dad. I do. I don't want to be this person anymore." She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But can you ever forgive me? For what I said? For how I treated you?" The question lingered between us, raw and desperate. I could see in her face how much it cost her to ask, how deeply her pride had been cut down for her to even let those words leave her mouth. I didn't answer right away. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, letting her feel the weight of her own question. Forgiveness isn't something to be handed out like a spare coin. It's something earned, proven through change. And in that moment, I decided she needed to sit in that silence just a little longer, because sometimes silence teaches more than any answer ever could. She sat there, eyes wide and wet, waiting for an answer that didn't come. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around us both like a thick fog. I could see the way her fingers trembled as she twisted them together, the way her lips pressed tight to keep from breaking into another sob. "Dad," she whispered again, more fragile this time. "Please, just tell me you forgive me." I leaned back in my chair, my face calm, my eyes steady on hers. Inside, my heart ached. I was her father, after all, but I knew I couldn't let the moment slip by too easily. Forgiveness given too quickly is forgiveness wasted. She had to understand the weight of what she'd done. "Do you remember my birthday?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flickered, her shoulders sinking under the memory. "Yes," she whispered. "You sat across from me, and I asked for nothing more than a meal together. And what did you give me instead?" Her tears spilled again. "I know," she choked out. I told you you were a burden." The words hung between us, sharp, even now. I nodded slowly, letting them linger. "And after you said it, do you remember what I did?" She hesitated, then shook her head. I sat in silence. I didn't argue. I didn't fight back. I let you leave me in the quiet, as though I didn't matter. You let me sit in that silence, with nothing but my pain for company. Her sobs grew louder, her face crumpling as the memory settled into her chest. "Now," I said firmly, "you sit in it. You sit in the silence until you understand what it feels like." Her lips quivered as she buried her face in her hands, her cries muffled but raw. I didn't move to comfort her. I stayed where I was, letting the silence weigh on her, letting it carve the lesson deeper than any words could. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, and still I said nothing. Because forgiveness is not a gift handed out easily. It's a truth that must be earned. And in that silence, she began to realize it. The silence had stretched so long that even the ticking of the clock on the wall felt louder than our breathing. I sat steady, watching her break in front of me, her sobs raw, her pride stripped away piece by piece. For years I had carried her without thanks, without recognition. Now, for the first time, she was carrying the weight of her own words. Finally, she lifted her head, her face red and swollen, her voice trembling. "Dad," she whispered, barely holding herself together. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I called you a burden because I didn't want to face myself. I thought I was strong. I thought I was independent. But it was you. It was always you keeping me standing, and I treated you like you were nothing." Her words cracked as she pressed her hand against her chest. "I can't take it back. I can't erase what I said. But please believe me, I see it now. I see everything you did for me, everything you gave up, everything you carried so I could pretend I was doing it all myself. And I hate myself for the way I treated you." I felt the weight of her confession sink into the room. These weren't excuses, these weren't empty words. For the first time, my daughter wasn't lashing out or blaming someone else. She was owning it, every mistake, every cruel word, every blind moment when she refused to see me. Her voice broke completely as she leaned forward, her tears falling to the floor. "I'm sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. Not because I need your money. Not because I need the lights back on or the car back, but because I finally understand what I lost when I called you that. I lost you, and I can't live with that." For a moment, I just sat there, my chest tight, my throat burning. I had waited for years to hear words like these, but I never imagined they would come through such pain. I leaned forward slowly, resting my hands on my knees, my eyes locked on hers. "That's all I ever needed," I said softly. "For you to see me, for you to understand that I wasn't your burden. I was your father, and I gave you everything because I loved you." Her tears fell harder, but this time there was something else behind them, relief. We sat there for a long time, the room quiet, except for the sound of her soft sobs. Slowly, I reached across the space between us and rested my hand on hers. Her fingers clung to me tightly, as though she was afraid I might slip away again. For the first time in years, I saw the little girl I used to know, the one who once believed her father was her hero. "Dad," she whispered through her tears, "can we start over?" I nodded slowly. "We can," I said. "But understand this, it's not about the bills, or the rent, or the car. It was never about money. It's about respect. It's about seeing the people who love you, and valuing them before they're gone. Words matter. Choices matter. And you have to carry your share of the weight from now on." She nodded, her face wet with tears, her grip still tight on my hand. For the first time in a long time, I believed she understood. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, I sat alone in the quiet living room, staring at the extinguished candle from my birthday still sitting on the table. That tiny flame had gone out in silence, just like the warmth I thought I'd lost forever. But now, maybe, just maybe, a new light was beginning to flicker between us. I thought about her mother again, about the promise I made when she was gone. I kept it. I gave everything I could to keep our daughter safe. And though the road had been cruel, though the words had cut deep, maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for all along. The moment our daughter finally learned what it truly meant to carry love and responsibility together. To everyone listening, I'll say this: being called a burden by someone you love cuts deeper than any blade. But sometimes, the only way to teach them the truth is to step back and let them feel the weight of life without you. It's not revenge for the sake of cruelty, it's wisdom born of love. Have you ever been called a burden by someone you sacrificed everything for? Did it make you question your worth? Share your story in the comments. I read them all, and I want to know where you're watching from. And if my story resonated with you, subscribe and join this community, because together we're stronger than the pain others put on us.